Hello, thank you for joining the weekly Friday Lunch and Learn. Every Friday at noon, Sierra Club Iowa chapter goes live to give you an important environmental update. And we have some information about one of the communities that is fighting some data centers in the Palo area in Linn County. We're also going to be having a webinar next Tuesday, which we'll tell you about at the end, but we're going to hand it off to Wally, who can give us an update on what's happening and just an overview. So thank you, Wally. I'll share my screen and hand it off to you.
Okay. Well, we'll wait till the slides get up there. There we are. Next steps with the Palo data center. So this is an issue that we've been working on for several months now. The background is that Google wants to build up to 6 data centers in Iowa, or in Linn County. And Linn County had adopted an ordinance regulating data centers that would have required a water study to determine whether or not there was sufficient water, and how much Google was going to use, and the impact. Also, there was a community development agreement that Google would have had to have signed. And so Google, we thought, was going to go along with all that, but then all of a sudden, Google dropped those plans and now wants to be annexed into the city of Palo. Now, Palo is a city of about 1,700 people just northwest of Cedar Rapids. Let's go to the next slide. So it's not quite clear what the conversations or discussion was between Google and the city of Palo in order to start this process of Palo building data centers in the city of Palo. But the Palo City Council has been working on an ordinance for data centers. We have some concerns about this ordinance. It passed with 3 readings, and one of the city council members voted against it, but the other council members, to one extent or another, are very much supportive of Google coming into the city and building their data center. This ordinance creates a special use district, making data centers a permitted use in that district. What that means is that in city zoning, there are use districts like residential, commercial, industrial, those kinds of things, recreational perhaps, an environmental district. And so this ordinance, rather than relying on the existing industrial district, which would have made sense, has created a special use district for data centers. And rather than being perhaps a conditional use, it makes data centers a permitted use. So it's almost automatic that they would be allowed to be brought into this special use district. The problem is that the data centers use millions of gallons of water a year. This is to cool their computer equipment, their data equipment in their buildings, because they create a lot of heat, and so they need the water to cool those facilities. As I mentioned, the Linn County ordinance, if Google had remained in the county, would have required Google to fund and obtain a study of the water resources. The Palo data center lets the Iowa Department of Natural Resources determine Google's water use and whether it will be permitted. The Iowa Code gives the DNR the authority to issue water use permits. Uh, the problem with that is that over the years, the DNR has just handed out these permits for the asking, and we I don't have a lot of confidence that the water resources for these Google data centers will be adequately protected. And so we asked the city council to change the ordinance to either do what Linn County did, but more importantly, to require the data centers to not use any water or use what's called a closed loop system, which uses very little water. But the city council did not do that. The ordinance also contains what is described as an economic development agreement. And the city council claims that this is the portion of the ordinance that will really put some restrictions and conditions on Google. But actually, this agreement's meaningless. First of all, because the agreement only applies if Google seeks incentives, financial incentives from the city. And as far as we know, they aren't going to ask for any incentives. And the other problem is that the only community benefit in the agreement is a property value protection plan for residents within 1,000 feet of the data center. In other words, if the resident can show that their property value is being reduced and they're within 1,000 feet of the data center, they will get some economic benefit from Google. But that doesn't go to all of the impacts that the data center has. And there's no way that the city can use this agreement to require Google to protect the residents of Palo. So let's go to the next slide. Before Google can begin operation, though, three things have to happen. The Google site has to be annexed into the city of Palo. Right now, the Google site is, as far as we know, where it's going to be. There's no official statement yet as to where the Google site will be, but we think it's going to be right across the road south from the Duane Arnold nuclear plant, which is where Google will get its power. Google has signed a power purchase agreement for 25 years from NextEra, the owner of Duane Arnold. The second thing that has to happen is that the city must follow through with its claim that it will negotiate the economic development agreement with Google and get some benefit for the city from that. And the third thing is that Google has to obtain the water use permit from the Iowa DNR. So let's go to the next slide. Regarding annexation, that's sort of a complex, maybe even confusing issue, but basically an annexation means that an area that's not now within the city has to be brought into the city by this annexation procedure, which is set out in the Iowa Code. And the site to be annexed has to be adjacent to the current city limits. In other words, it can't be some island out a mile or two away and be annexed. And the Google site here is like a mile or two away from the current Palo city limits. So aside from annexing the Google site, there has to be some property, some land between that Google site and the current city limits that is part of that annexation. And we don't know exactly how they plan to do that. But there are three kinds of annexation. If all the owners of all the land to be annexed agree to the annexation, it's what's called a voluntary annexation. The city council has to approve the annexation, but that's all there is to it. There's no way that people can legally object. And the city council here in Palo appears to be more than ready to approve of the annexation if it's a voluntary annexation. The next kind is if the owners of not more than 20% of the land to be annexed object, it is called an 80-20 voluntary annexation. And so if say like the owners of 15% of the land to be annexed object, it's called a 50-20 voluntary annexation. So it isn't totally voluntary, but it's voluntary in the sense that at least 80% of the land would be voluntarily annexed. So in this kind of annexation, the city council has to approve, just as they did in the voluntary annexation, but also the city development board has to approve it. The city development board is a 5-member board. It's a state agency composed of 5 members who are appointed by the governor. And that board holds an actual hearing where they hear evidence and they hear arguments and make a formal decision. It's almost like a contested case hearing you would have before, like the utility commission or some agency like that, where the board's actually hearing evidence and making a formal decision. And so there is a chance there that the city development board might stop the annexation even if the city council approves. The third kind of annexation is if none of the owners of the land to be annexed agree, or owners of more than 20% object, then it's an involuntary annexation. So let's go to the next slide. It's expected here, of course, that the annexation of the Google property, at least, will be voluntary, because Google obviously wants to be annexed to the city. So it will not be an involuntary annexation. It will either be completely voluntary, and the only way to stop it would be to persuade the city council not to approve it, or if it's an 80-20 annexation, in other words, up to 20% of the land in the area to be annexed would be objecting, then it's an 80-20 annexation. It would have to go through the council and the city development board. So let's go to the next slide. So that's annexation. That's the next thing that has to be done, because Google can't do anything further unless they're actually annexed into the city, and that gives the city the jurisdiction. So the DNR water use permit, to grant Google the permit to withdraw water from an aquifer or the Cedar River, the DNR must find that the water would be used for a beneficial use. We don't know for sure yet whether Google intends to obtain its water from an aquifer or from the Cedar River. The indication seems to be that they plan to get it from the Cedar River. But either way, they have to have the permit from the DNR. Now, a beneficial use, which the DNR must find exists, means that it must be in the best interest of the people of Iowa and is a reasonable use of the water. Historically, as I said, the DNR has granted permits just for the asking, and that's why the Palo ordinance's reliance on DNR permitting is so troubling. We would rather that the ordinance would have at least required a water study and provided that the zoning not be allowed if there was an adverse impact on the water resource. Or, as I said, to require that the data center use air cooling or at least a closed loop cooling system. So the DNR has to go through this process. They would look at the application for the water use from Google. They would allegedly make some sort of an analysis and then issue a draft permit. And that draft permit is where citizens would have the right to object, present comments, organize opposition. And that's been done on a few cases. And pardon me, more recently, and we've had some success in requiring the DNR to step back and re-evaluate what they've done. One striking example is a permit for water use for a quarry in Clayton County in northeast Iowa. And a little over a year ago, we had a public hearing, and there was so much pushback, so much good argument made as to why that permit should not be granted, that the DNR put a hold on that permit and asked the Iowa Geological Survey, which are experts on the groundwater and water resources, to do a study and come back with a report as to how much the water is available, what the impacts would be. And earlier this summer, the Geological Survey did that. We had another hearing, and the DNR has not finalized a new permit, but they have decided to reduce the amount of water the quarry is allowed to withdraw and impose some other conditions on that withdrawal. So we would encourage the citizens here in Palo to take advantage of the procedures for the DNR water use permit. So let's go to the next slide. And that leads us to what people can do to make sure that this plan by Google does not cause any adverse impacts to the city, to the folks, to the environment. And here's what you can do if you're, but particularly if you're in Linn County and even more specifically in the city of Palo, ask the city council to amend their ordinance to ensure that the citizens are protected with with an economic development agreement that really means something. And to and perhaps change the provisions about the water use, about setbacks, other issues that the ordinance should have contained but didn't. And the city can certainly amend that ordinance. In fact, the Linn County Supervisors, when after they passed that ordinance I mentioned, realized that there are a lot more data centers coming into Linn County than they had anticipated. So they have actually passed a moratorium on more data centers or any data centers being allowed in Linn County, and that may lead to an amendment of the ordinance. So that can be done. And continue letting the city council know that we object to the Google project. When we had a couple of public hearings on the Palo ordinance, there was a gymnasium filled with people, and over 100 people, and a lot of them spoke against the data center. So we need to keep doing that. Don't get discouraged. Even though the city council didn't listen, we did persuade one city council member. And so if we keep doing that, maybe the council will get the message, just like the Linn County Supervisors did. Be prepared to object to the annexation. As I said, if this is not a totally voluntary annexation, there are ways to object and to perhaps stop the annexation. And even if it's a voluntary annexation, if we can persuade the city council that it should not be that the Google project should not be annexed, then we can stop that annexation. Remember, the ordinance was not just for Google, it was for data centers generally. I mean, certainly Google was the 800-pound gorilla in the room. That the ordinance was not specifically for Google. So there's still a chance that if we can show why this Google project is not good, the city council could still not rezone or not allow the Google project. And finally, be prepared to object to the DNR water withdrawal permit. As I said, that may be a real ace in the hole on this. That water permit is something that the city council has no control over. And we as citizens do. So that's something we really need to be aware of. And finally, contact Brianna Coma, our the conservation coordinator, to be added to an email list that she's keeping about the Palo data center, and she will let you know what's coming up, what you can do, and help to organize folks to be effective. So I think with all of this, my message is don't be discouraged. We've still got a shot, and this is how democracy works. Thank you.
That's right. Well, I thank you very much. We do have one question before we tell you what the next step is, or another next step is, if you want to learn more about this. But the question is the IUC, Iowa Utilities Commission, involved in this process at all?
No. only very, very indirectly. Um, as I said, Google plans to get their um, power from the next era, uh, a Dwayne Arnold, a nuclear plant. And in order to do that, the next era has to get permits from the Iowa Utility Commission and also the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to restart Dwayne Arnold. Dwayne Arnold's been shut down since 2020, and it's been in decommissioning. So there's a lot of work being done to try to prevent those two permits from the Utility Commission and from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But directly with this issue with Palo, no, the IUC has no jurisdiction over that. Data centers don't produce power, and it's the production of power that the Utility Commission has jurisdiction over.
Thank you, Wally. So I'm sure that anyone watching has heard about a data center coming in near them or in the community next door. We've been getting dozens of calls over the last few months from communities who are hearing plans and want to get their communities prepared to organize to stop the data centers from coming in. So we are holding a statewide webinar this coming Tuesday, August 4th at 6:30 p.m. And we're going to talk about just a general overview of data centers, where they're being proposed in Iowa, what communities can do, and really digging in on some ordinances that are stronger than what we just talked about here with the Palo ordinance. That way your community can be prepared. So please join us on Tuesday at 6:30. I put a link in the chat or in the comments where you can RSVP. And then we will tell you next steps. And we have two speakers. We have the mayor of Fairfax, Iowa, who's going to be speaking. And we also have Representative Cindy Golden, who's introducing data center legislation as well. So join us on Tuesday. Thank you, Wally. And everyone have a great weekend. We'll see you next Friday at noon. Bye.